There's a new public face to Britain's pending exit from the European Union. Boris Johnson has won the leadership of the Conservative Party and tomorrow will be named Prime Minister. He has vowed to pull the UK out of the European Union by Halloween. Mel Cappe is a former Canadian High Commissioner to the UK. He currently serves as a professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and he joins us this morning with his take on Boris Johnson. And love him or hate him, everybody seems to have an opinion, Mel, on the character that is Boris Johnson. What do you make of this news?
Well, there's no doubt that we all have opinions, and Boris is quite a character. It's sort of like John. If you say John, everyone knows we're talking about John Ehrlichman. If you say Boris, everyone in the UK knows you're talking about one person. Boris has made a name for himself by being irreverent, by being smart, by being very clever, but he is also incompetent and unfocused. And that's not a good idea for a prime minister, especially when you're staring down Iran in the Gulf of the Straits of Hormuz.
Well, we haven't even gotten into that issue this morning. You're absolutely right. I mean, that could ultimately be the first order of business, but it feels like his fellow party members felt like if it's about trying to get things resolved on Brexit after this slow bleed, there seemed to be a feeling within his party that he was the guy for the job.
No doubt, and he was very convincing. The win was far greater than I thought it would be. But let's remember, there are about 30 some odd million, and some of them are very odd, million voters in the UK, and Boris was elected by essentially 2/3 of 160,000 of them. And the 160,000 are the members of the Conservative Party. So how well he will do in leading a United Kingdom is a different question.
That's the key of what I'd like to know from you. We talked about Halloween, the UK scheduled to leave the EU on October 31st. Boris Johnson wants to renegotiate, and the EU doesn't seem interested. So how do you bring these 2 points together?
Well, you're absolutely right. So Ursula von der Leyen is who's the new president of the Commission that has taken over from Jean-Claude Juncker. So you've got new players on the UK side. You've had new players on the EU side. Ursula von der Leyen has said she's not going to open the deal. They have a good deal. It's good for the 27 EU members that are left, and that's what the deal is. Now, Boris can negotiate changes to the political protocol, which is accompanying the withdrawal agreement. But that is just words and intentions and not really going to govern the way Britain will leave the EU. Having said that, I think the fact that there are new players may be an opportunity. Von der Leyen has said that she can imagine an extension beyond October 31st. I'm not convinced that's a good idea. I think your listeners and viewers, as business people, would be much more interested in a bit of certainty, whereas an extension just extends the uncertainty.
It's a great point, Mel, because obviously we've watched the not just the economic concerns as things slowly move towards Brexit under Theresa May, but even in the period since she announced that she would be stepping down, there seemed to be concern about what that ultimately would mean. You saw that play out in the performance of the pound.
Absolutely. So the pound is down. They're now talking about it prospectively going down almost, $1.10 US or lower. You have the prospect of companies who had actually gone into a pause pending the March 31st deadline, where a lot of the car manufacturers planned for the beginning of April to be closed in manufacturing so they could adjust to the new rules. If you keep the uncertainty in place, people are going to have to figure out what to do for November. And that's not a good thing, to keep the uncertainty in place. The governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has made it clear that there's a prospect of a recession. A number of think tanks, both in the UK and on the continent, have forecast up to a 2% decline in GDP.
All right, well, deadlines seem to be made to be broken. You alluded to maybe moving beyond Halloween, and we'll see what happens on that front. But just this idea of having a second referendum, which throughout this whole process, from time to time, we talk about it. A lot of people will pour cold water on the idea. But what do you think? I mean, if we get to October 31st and things are still up in the air, what do you think about that prospect?
Well, a new referendum doesn't change anything. You need to get a deal with the EU, or you need to decide to suspend the whole operation. And a new referendum is not going to change the politics in the Conservative Party. And as long as the Conservatives are in power, this is going to stay a problem. Now, what are the prospects actually of a new election? So Parliament comes back in September. There is no new deal. They don't like how things have been going under a Johnson prime ministership. What happens if he actually loses the confidence of the House? Remember that he's being held up as a government by the Democratic Unionist Party, 10 votes in Parliament. He's got a minority government. If he loses those 10 votes from Northern Ireland, the government falls and you need an election. You have an election a month before you're actually going to crash out of the European Union. This is a big deal. There's a great deal of uncertainty still on the horizon. A new referendum doesn't change that. A new election doesn't change that. In fact, it increases the uncertainty.
Just listening to you, Mel, do you think there is any possibility that Boris Johnson, the face of Brexit, could do a complete reversal and then push for the idea of not leaving?
So I don't think he would push for not leaving, but I think he is a very smart guy, clever and witty. He will come up with a rationale of why the Theresa May deal, with appropriate accommodations on the protocols in the exchange of letters beside them, might be the best thing. And Boris has been known to prevaricate and mislead and lie, some would say, in the past. And so for Johnson to find a way out of this is entirely possible. But I think it has to be based on some kind of deal. Remember, John, that this is only the withdrawal agreement for the interim arrangement. This is only going to apply through to the end of 2020. It's in that period up to 2020 when you have to negotiate a new deal with the European Union. That's where Johnson has an opportunity to make a new deal.
Well, it's going to be a wild 3 months. Mel, thanks very much for your perspective.
Pleasure.
Mel Cappe, former High Commissioner to the UK and professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy on the Brexit story.